Hi, this is Richard Pace, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's March 8th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Richard Pace about Second Coming, Only Begotten Son. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, and it's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. Richard is a comic book writer, artist, inker, and colorist whose work has spanned Marvel, DC, Image, and more. In addition to being the cover artist on Imaginary Fiends, his art credits include Doctor Strange, Spike, Heavy Metal, The New Warriors, Pit, X-Men, and more. After completing the first arc of Second Coming for Ahoy Comics, Richard chats about the current storyline, Second Coming, Only Begotten Son. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Pace about Second Coming, Only Begotten Son. So, Richard Pace, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the conversation is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Okay, so I was a child of the summer drive, where you would get like these poly bags full of comics, and your parents would toss them in the back seat of the car when you go for a long summer drive for some sort of vacation thing. So a lot of my earliest comics were completely disjointed, just what came in one of these poly bags. So there'd be like a 100-page DC Giant, there'd be a Marvel comic, maybe a Spider-Man or a Ghost Rider. Mm-hmm. Probably another 100-page DC Giant, because those seem to be like proliferating in those poly bags like crazy. Yeah. Maybe an issue of X-Men. And so the 100-page Giants were the really good ones, because you could get a lot of reading. And they had like little weird articles and like puzzles and stuff to do in those things.
And lots of reprints too, right?
Yeah, a lot of reprints. So I'd be reading a recent Jim Aparo Batman story, and then right after it there would be stuff from like the 60s and then stuff from the 50s.
Yeah, like Dollman
and
or
then
something.
stuff and then stuff like right from the beginning of Batman. It would just be like a ton of stuff.
Yeah, cool.
And then also have like some of the cartooning, like the adventures of like Batman, Superman when they were like kids. Mm-hmm. And you have little Lex Luthor and all that stuff. All that really weird DC stuff. Yeah. The Marvel stuff was more appealing, but I didn't get that much of it. But those are my earliest comic book memories.
Cool. That's really good stuff.
Oh, Commandy was one of them. Yeah. Oh my God. And that was like that did things with my head.
Yeah.
And I think the next year there was like an OMAC.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In one of them. And it was the one where on the cover his girlfriend is in a box.
Oh my.
And like you see her head, her hands, and her legs are sticking out of the box, and he's throwing her at us. And I was like, I don't know, 5 maybe 6. Wow. And I'm reading this, and I can't make heads nor tails out of what the hell's going on.
Yeah, but it was
so fascinating.
That got you into it for sure. So
that isn't what got me in the comics.
No,
those are my no. I mean, it's like comics were everywhere, so you could read them like crazy. I think my older brother was a little bit more into comics than I was at that age. I was really getting into Greek mythology. So I didn't really seriously get into comics until after I decided I wanted to do art for a living.
What was there one book that said, I know I can do this?
Wasn't so much one book that made me know that I can do this. Is I was walking through a local Kohl's, which I think are almost extinct now. Yeah. I don't know if Kohl's even exists anymore.
There's a couple left, yeah.
Okay. So I was walking through a local Kohl's when I was growing up in Winnipeg, and I walked through the art section, and they had just stocked, because I was there pretty much every week, they had just stocked the fantastic art of Frank Frazetta with the Egyptian Queen cover.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at this, and I go, I've never seen that before. I mean, it's like the art section was like full of like how to paint flowers. Here's a Rembrandt book. Here's a Da Vinci book. Here's some modern art and a couple of how to draw portraits books and stuff like that. Really wasn't much of an art section, but I saw this Frazetta book, and I was like, what is this? And I'm flipping through it, and it's got this amazing for me, it was like, oh, this is what mythology art should look like.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this is what the Greek gods and all this stuff should look like.
Mm-hmm.
I had enough money in my pocket from my allowance to buy it. And then my grandparents helped me get the remaining 3 that were out at that time. And reading his biography was, I was always the kid who could draw, right?
Yeah,
So there was already that. So at 12, I was like, wow, look, you can do this for a living. And the process is you just be really talented when you're young, check, because I didn't know better. And then you draw comics for a bit, and bang, you're Frank Frazetta. So I figured, okay, well, I better get serious about comics so I can become Frank Frazetta later on.
Good stuff. Yeah.
And at that, within a couple of years of like just picking up a couple things, like, I mean, one of the things I picked up was like Howard Chaykin's Star Wars off the stand and all that stuff, weird stuff like that. Yeah. So in high school, after a couple of years of starting taking it seriously, I was just buying stuff in like my local Max Milk. Yep. A friend of mine says, there's comic stores. And I'm like, there's what? Meanwhile, I'm looking like it's like I got like, I don't know, 5 or 6 issues of the Hulk that I really liked, but there was like gaps because the store never got them all.
Right.
So yeah, you can get the Hulks you're missing that way. So my friend takes me downtown Winnipeg to Comic World, which I don't think exists there anymore. Pretty sure it's long gone. And it was really like one of those early 80s comics retail shops where it's like it was just one big box of a room, shelves on both sides piled high with comics of all sorts, shelves in the middle with like comic boxes organized by publisher and permanent. And it's like you would have, I don't know, some indie heroes incorporated right next to heavy metal. And it was like there was like no attempt at like separating content. It's like you'd walk a little way. They had like this one kind of like big rack of DC books that were like from the last 2 years that just weren't selling, so they just stuck them all there. I could walk 3 feet over this size, and wow, look at these boxes of Penthouse.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, it was a very different time.
Sure. Well, Frazetta is definitely a great influence, but I'm wondering who influences your art today.
Well, I think Frazetta's still in there.
Okay.
May not be as noticeable because, I mean, along the way I studied a lot of illustrators, so there's like Bernie Fuchs and Bob Peak and a lot of the other classic illustrators. And some of those I found through other comic artists like Bill Sienkiewicz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to think that, at this point, after doing it this long, I'm my own artist. But, I mean, I think in terms of how I approach line, there's still going to be some Sienkiewicz, there's going to be some Wrightson, there's going to be some John Buscema and how I do certain figures and gestures. A lot of the things that were there that were really blowing my mind in my teens are in the fundamentals of the work.
Absolutely. They don't go away.
But after making those lines and drawing those figures for way too long, I'd like to think that my lines are my own.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. But there's still guys you look up to, so that's something to say.
Well, there's still, I mean, one of the wonderful things that has happened over the last 20 years is the advent of digital art to the degree that it's really easy for these kids to get the programs where it used to be so much harder to get art materials to actually work with.
Yeah.
So if you can get Painter or Photoshop at 12, and then I'd be like going, okay, I have no idea what to do with oil paints, but I can buy some and then fiddle around with it. But nowadays you can walk over to YouTube and say, well, this is how I draw a skull.
Yeah.
And then you can practice it, and it's like, oh, okay, now I know how to do it. So you have kids, and I say kids now, they're in their 20s. You'll have kids who will hit art school with about 5 or 6 years worth of education that I never got.
Right, yeah.
Because it's just there. And so there's these young punks who are coming up who learn things, especially with digital. I look at it and go, well, tell me how you did that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's what's a good analogy? I taught myself to swim eventually, largely on my own with some books and a couple of people who gave me pointers. Okay. These are kids who basically were born into the water.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a little much. I mean, you can be envious of it sometimes. You look at it and go, oh my God, how long have you been? It's like, especially if you meet some kid who's like, you're looking at their work and they go, wow, they're really, really good. And you go, so what are you, 18? And you go, no, I'm 15. And I'm like, oh my God. right?
Oh my.
Yeah, so it's there's some young artists out there who you got to look up to because they're just so spectacular.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, I want to talk about your latest project you have going on called Second Coming, Only Begotten Son. I know that we chatted about the first series, and now this is the follow-up. So maybe for those not familiar with the Ahoy Comics series, how would you describe it to someone?
Well, if you're coming to this book and you missed all the controversy and all the media coverage, it's the premise is what if Jesus Christ decided to become roommates with someone who's a lot like Superman, and it gets stranger from there.
Okay.
It's very clearly we're exploring the issues of what people perceive as being power. What is power? How does power get used? And that's the high-minded aspect of it. But the rest of it, it's like we're trying to make people laugh. We're trying to look at the world around us and see how messed up it is and make them laugh. And I think we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, it looks like you've got the whole gang back from the original series. But I'm wondering, did you change any part of the process? Did you learn anything along the way where you could say, let's tweak this to make this workflow better?
Not so much that. A big part of it is we're doing something that a lot of people haven't done. When I brought Leonard on board, it was to give a very specific feel for the pages that would be much more oriented towards Sunstar or Superman stand-in. Basically, to give the reader an idea that these are the rules of the world that you're looking at. If it looks like Leonard's finishes over my layouts, then you're very much in the world where Sunstar's reality is taking hold. And if it's the scratchy, fizzy, fuzzy stuff that I do, well, then you're either going way back in history or you're in heaven,
okay.
Or the divine is taking over.
Right.
And in this arc, I don't know if it's not really spoiling anything. I mean, the longer Jesus is on Earth, he's going to be starting his old tricks up again. So it starts becoming more, when Jesus is on Earth, he becomes more entangled with humans, and so he starts getting drawn more by Leonard.
Interesting.
So hopefully the readers will pick up on that.
Yeah, and that's Leonard Kirk.
Yes,
a great artist in his own right, and you guys work really well together. We talked about this last time, how you guys noodle ideas around, go back and forth, and I'm wondering. I know that you just touched on it briefly, but the critical feedback, both positive and negative. I'm wondering if somehow that influenced this follow-up somehow. If you're needling those critical people in some way.
Not really. Mark had a very set idea of how he wanted to approach what we were doing here from the start, and we were caught a little surprised at how big a protest there was against our book.
Okay.
I mean, 250,000 people getting upset at us because the conservative media didn't have anything else to defend Trump against that week.
Okay.
I mean, we were, in any realistic sense, we were a distraction for that week.
Right. Because
Trump had screwed up again. And so then they basically pointed the evangelical right at these people, saying DC Comics should be allowed to publish that with Superman. And of course, no one paid any attention to what we were really doing, and because the book wasn't out, and they just protested. They were just angry. Mm-hmm. And it's what they do. They're told to get angry at something. They get angry at something. I mean, I got death threats. I don't think Mark got any.
Wow.
I was much more online than Mark was at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've been on the internet long enough to understand that the vast majority of death threats are never going to come through. They're never going to happen. But they're still unnerving to get.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And but honestly, the book came out.
Yeah.
We got another massive wave of media attention when we came out with Ahoy, and all the protesters went away because the book was out, and they couldn't get people angry over something that they could look at and realize, it's not what we're telling them to get angry about.
Yeah.
Since the book's been out, we have a huge following from various Christian communities across. And we've gotten so many letters from people who are like, Christian youth outreach people, pastors, and other people with religious backgrounds who love the nuance and what we're exploring with this. Yeah. I think it's kind of funny. It's like we have all these religious people liking these, the book created by all these atheists. And they agree with what we have Jesus saying in the book, even though it's like, well, we're a bunch of atheists.
Is the series going to continue? Because this is like, as you said, an arc. Do you foresee that there's something else coming down the road, or you think this might be it?
Well, at this point, as I understand it, Mark feels he has around 24 issues worth of story to tell.
Oh, okay.
So I'm finishing up issue 3 this week, and that means I'll be unemployed in about 15 issues.
Oh no! Uh-oh. Oh.
No. It's yeah. Well, I'll find something else to do. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
But no. So we got at least 2 more arcs to do, maybe 3, depending on what Mark comes up with.
Okay. Cool.
But there is an end in sight. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it all turns out.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, when we last spoke, just to turn the conversation a wee bit, you mentioned you were working on Windows, and you were sort of tied to that. I'm wondering if that's still the case, or perhaps did you update your workflow in any way?
I'm still in Windows.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm still using the same Photoshop I've been using. I got the last Photoshop before Photoshop went to the cloud.
Yeah. Sure.
And it works perfectly fine for me.
That's great.
It does everything I needed to do. And about every quarter, I see a bunch of my friends tearing their hairs out online about how something stopped working because of the latest Adobe update.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like, everything I need to do, I can do here.
Absolutely. There you go.
I'm dreading the day where a new Windows machine comes out and can't run my Adobe CS5.
Oh my, yeah.
And then I go, I guess I'll have to buy it.
You might have to go to the black market and find an old computer.
That works really well. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I got one friend who actually has a work-only computer. He's so worried about viruses and everything. Sure. He basically has one computer set up where he only has his work software on it.
Right.
He has a laptop where he does all his personal computing stuff. So, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad idea.
Yeah. Better be safe than sorry.
That's true.
You've talked about Second Coming, Only Begotten Son, and you sort of hinted about something else coming down the road, but wondering what's next for you. Do you have any other projects that you can talk about right now?
I wonder if I can talk about them. I got a couple stories coming up and some anthologies coming up, which is fun. Yeah. I verbally committed to writing and drawing a one-shot for another creator. I am going to be starting serializing shorter comics on my Patreon to get a sense of that. Just in terms of like having other things. Now these 2 anthology things came up, so they're going to, that Patreon thing down the road. But I like the idea of actually serializing comics in a not necessarily a webcomic fashion, but basically allow the people who support me to get first look at something, and then maybe I'll find a place to publish it. Purely on almost like an experimental basis, like will this work creatively? If the story's a failure, I'll go, well, I guess I won't be publishing this anywhere.
There you go. Oh, sure. Yeah. Good stuff. So where do you recommend people go to find you online to find out about your current and future projects?
Well, I think the one platform social media that gets everything would be Instagram, and that's Richard_Pace. I'm rpace on Twitter. I think I'm searchable under just Richard Pace for Patreon. The usual suspect spots to find the artists online.
Great. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you want to get across in this interview.
Read all the Ahoy books. They're all fun. I've yet to encounter anyone who did not like Second Coming, who didn't like all the other Ahoy books. I think we found a good home there. So, Second Coming's, we're doing well. Pretty soon I'm going to be working on the 3rd arc. And I think we got a lot of fun stuff to share with our readers.
Thanks to Richard for the chat. You can discover more about Richard on Twitter at rpace and on Instagram at Richard_Pace. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.